Hey guys, I have with me here today William Hackett, the head of Fintech Growth at Pangea Group here today. Hi, William.
Hey, Sean. Thanks for inviting me. Very kind, and yeah, long-time fan of well, in startup years, long-time fan of Chartloop.
Totally, super. So you know, in our podcast here, I always like to be talking with people about their sales strategies, and specifically with you guys being in the fintech world. So let's maybe dive right into things.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Awesome. So maybe, I mean, to begin with, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and what Pangea Group does.
Absolutely. So for the past 10 years or so, I've worked for publicly listed or VC-backed financial technology companies, predominantly growing and opening new markets across Europe and Asia. So that's my background. On the personal side, London lad, and I did the whole expat thing for a while where I went to Singapore for 3 and a bit years, which was awesome and couldn't recommend that sort of approach more. Yeah, it was nice to go and travel the world as well, and that was a major perk of it when I was still a little bit younger. On the Pangea side, we work with B2B software companies that are focused either on financial services or the life science space, and we help them with go-to-market. So I'll get into the nuggets a little bit more about exactly what that is in a sec, but broad brush, we're helping companies who are typically scaling fast and looking for a de-risk model to be able to grow.
Right, and typically what size companies do you guys work with?
So our ICP is a little bit different, right? So depending on the size, so we work with 40,000 person companies and 10-person companies. So how we help is really relative to the stage. But what we see for Series C companies and below is that they're looking for a de-risked model that gives them hyperscale, right? And so what we do, or rather the question they're asking themselves is, how do we scale as quickly as possible given the economics of their business, and how can we keep the risk appetite low? So we've got companies that are doing sort of 100 times or growing sort of 20% year on year, but that's really often dependent on their size. So that's sort of like where we're interested to go. And then where we land in terms of ourselves is we're right in the middle of that. So accelerating time to market, more often than not, it'll be a new geography or a new vertical, and trying to de-risk the outcomes. So the challenge that a lot of those companies get is where do I place their bets? Who do I do it with, and how do we go about it? So we try and answer that through a partnership where we'll go with our clients into those markets or verticals and build the go-to-market team together. So whatever that combination is, and then we'll overlay market intelligence to help pinpoint the where and the how. And if it's a net new market, so new geography, we can actually provide the back office infrastructure that helps reduce the risk if they want that. And then I guess the follow-on challenge, right, which everyone always talks about, is once you're doing that, is how do you deliver an awesome employee experience, right? So we spend a huge amount of our time talking to our clients about how they think about that and how ultimately they make sure that not just retention stays high, but enjoyment and everyone's having a good time.
Absolutely. And are you finding that you guys are working mostly with U.S. companies coming to Europe, or European companies looking to expand? What does it tend to be?
That's yeah, that's pretty much nail on the head, right? So for us, in terms of the customer profile, it's companies that have got product market fit and are looking to scale outside of its current markets. So they've done well in their core market. So you've got an Irish fintech, let's say, they've just won AIB, a really great logo in their market. And then the question is, how do they translate that into breaking into the US, right? So there'll typically be a Series B, roughly 25 to 100 people. Or, as you said rightly, it's a US company hopping the pond who wants to go big and fast into Europe, and they don't really have room for the mistakes that one can make when doing that for the first time.
Right, right. Absolutely. So, the fintech space now is kind of boiling hot. There's so many things happening, for at least for an outsider to fintech. There's crypto. I hear things about neobanks and different innovations. So what do all these trends mean to, the growth or the sales practice, in the B2B sense of things?
Well, anyone who got into crypto or Bitcoin early is laughing now. So that from a personal growth, that's probably the number one, right? But I think the way to think about it is by category. So there's 20,000 plus fintechs. So the way that we look at it is looking for high growth categories, and there are a couple in that space, but there are also ones that are further along the maturity scale, where there's an increasing amount of risk for the businesses in that space. So like, for example, payments, there's a decent amount of consolidation that's happening, as well as some big big investments that are coming in. In the UK, one of the well-known neobanks called Starling Bank just announced that they're looking to acquire a lending business, which inevitably will trigger further consolidation in the market. As mentioned, crypto and the digital asset space really feels like it's coming of age now, as we're seeing more and more of the institutional investors heading in there. And then everyone knows about the cybersecurity story, right? So that tied around the banks, there's been a huge uptick, and all the companies that are driving the digitization of those old school processes that sit around compliance. And that's probably the final bucket, where it's hard to even imagine, but regulatory and the data side are getting a ton of coverage now. There's something the other day, one of the major banks, I think it was HSBC, created a data lake, and that data lake was the same size as the entire internet 4 years ago. So it gives you a sense of just how big a problem that some of these banks have when it comes to managing their data and understanding what it means and to dissect that. So the pace of change has massively changed in a couple of categories, but I think we're going to start to see a few of those spaces consolidate, while there'll be some big winners because of the COVID digitization that's being driven through it. Right.
Absolutely. So maybe drilling a little closer into sales and growth. I mean, is account-based sales a thing in finance and fintech? Do you guys apply it in any ways? Things like that?
Massively, yeah. Because of the complexity of the decisions that get made and the natural nature of large enterprise organizations like banks, definitely. An account-based methodology is hugely important. And ourselves, we do it a bunch. We do it through a mix of tech and data. And we're trying to always look for how do we leverage the technology stack and the data that feeds into that to get the best results. So there's a ton going on in the space though, sales tech and data. And what we personally try and do is to add value by sitting in between all of that and orchestrating the different data sets and working those into the tech stacks to deliver the right outcomes, right? So at the moment, to be frank, it's a bit of manual. It's sort of like a manual system of intelligence, but it's an area we spend a lot of time talking about how we could automate that. So, maybe rather than focusing just on the account-based sales side, like one of the good examples that we use some tools for is competitive mapping. So, from a compete perspective, understanding what your competition is doing and where they're strong is super valuable. So, effectively what you'd be asking is, which markets is my competition strong at, geographically, physically, where do they have that experience, so where does their network map to, which companies did their team work at before, and sort of understand what they're talking about by looking at all of those indicators around social, press, and ultimately their individual activity. So tools like Chartloop have been crazily helpful for us when we're building out these competitive maps. And then when you overlay a few other data points, you can really start to dissect where they're pointing and then position yourself as a business to either take that competition on directly or to look at a flanker strategy based on some of their softer points. So yeah, as mentioned, to date we've been doing this manually, which is a drag. So finding you guys has been a breath of fresh air. Honestly, yeah, I think it's days that you've saved us in manual research and effort cobbling it all together.
That's fantastic. Thank you. And would you say, like, when doing this, account intel, in the sales process? Is there a certain threshold, of a cutoff where you say like, oh, if it's below 100 employees, or if it's less than a whatever public company, we don't really need to do that kind of depth? Like, when do you like, go in guns blazing and do this full research?
So usually it'll be either right at the start of an assessment process when a company's thinking about its strategy and how it goes into the market. So it's still sort of in that ideation phase when we're trying to build a research to have a position, or actually very tactically. So when we've got deals on the horizon, when we're trying to understand the competitive landscape for who we're going to be running against, as when one is selling a true enterprise solution into the banks, we're talking 7, possibly 8 figures. So it really matters how you position, and also knowing how your competition is going to position against you can give you a massive, massive advantage.
Right. No, absolutely. So that makes a lot of sense. So maybe is there in a specific story or a campaign that you're very proud of us that you can maybe share to kind of bring to life how one would go about pursuing such a strategy?
Yeah. So there's a company we're working with that's like very well funded by tier 1 private equity. And the way they think about banking infrastructure which is what they sell, is hugely innovative for their space. So we did some deep market intel work with them over the summer, helping really identify where the potential opportunity was by market, and within those markets where the low-hanging fruit was. So with that bit of intel that we built out, we were able to very quickly understand where the opportunity was, so that we could then start putting the teams and the support and the resources against those markets to convert them. And since we ran that, they're now ramping up their go-to-market team across Europe to go after it. They've gone from a team of 0 to 20 in a matter of 6 months on the go-to-market side, and have already started bagging some tier 1 clients, which has been awesome. Wow. To watch it all go from a summer project and ideation with some early good indicators, to actually seeing the cogs turning and the results coming in.
Right. And in these types of strategies, do you have any like ratios of like how many accounts does a rep work, or how do you divide up territories, given the complexity of every an account can be kind of like the size of a city?
It's so hard to answer that properly, because I think it depends on the ICP, it depends on your average sales price cycle, and of course, whether we're trying to do elephant hunting. But ultimately, I think it's got to be a blend of both, right? You want to pay the mortgage every day with some of the run rate stuff, but at the same time, you are looking to bag some of those elephants. And I think actually the account-based mapping approach, or the competitive mapping approach, can be used for both of them. But the depth that one will go into probably will only happen in those tier 1 deals. But it's a very good question that we debate a lot ourselves.
Right. Cool. And what would you say? I mean, is there any specific challenge that you find pertaining to fintech that doesn't necessarily apply, in different areas like HR or IT?
I think the biggest challenge with growth is talent. I think there's a crazy demand for quality people who understand what they're doing and have the ambition to go and chase it. And I think that's probably the single greatest challenge in the market, particularly when you look at the amount of funding coming in and the amount of companies that are on a path that requires them to grow. Otherwise, there's some bigger fish to fry. So in our space, the growth section, there's a huge, huge demand for quality talent.
Right. Fascinating. And is there like, do you find like people coming from like classic, like, the school background, or is this more like being, 10 years in the trenches selling, or?
It's, we wrestle with that question a million times a day. So it's very dependent on the culture of the company and what they can nurture. There's a really good, I'm sure you and anyone listening knows the App Dynamics story. There's a really good video from a guy, one of the VPs there. He's now at a company called Accountbased, talking about how he thinks about quality candidates for commercial. And he breaks it down into a couple of different categories, which is quite interesting. But like one of the main things is the ability to overcome. And he looks for it in the interview process, in personal events in their life, how they've overcome like a real personal challenge that set them back. And I think that's a very interesting one, because ultimately it's a tenacious game, right? And there's a lot of stuff where you've got to keep going in the face of massive adversity. So someone who's got that inner grit really, really is a key trait that one looks for.
Right. Absolutely. This guy is he? Do you remember his name? Is he one of the? I was just asking because
Yeah, go on.
No, after our conversation, I'd love to look him up and find
he's called Luke Rogers.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Yeah. So definitely, app dynamics and the whole kind of PTC. Family really sprouted up like a whole generation of sales leaders, which is really inspiring to watch.
100%. Yeah, it's there's definitely a methodology in there.
Absolutely. Cool. So since I'm speaking to somebody who does sales and growth, can you tell me a little bit about some of your sales stack and tools that you use? Would love to share some tips with fellow comrades.
Yeah, no, definitely. So we use a ton, right? And from Salesforce on the back end, we've used a bunch of other CRMs as well through our clients. And I really like to focus on like specific tool problems, as often the bigger ones, while incredible, you do need quite a developed and mature organization to be able to get the most out of them. But so one of the ones that, unsurprisingly, right, that we've been using relates to total addressable market. So a lot of the TAM work that we'll do. And we were introduced to a company called Quant Copy through a buddy of mine. He's a sales guy at Go Cardless called Alex White. And they're doing some really interesting stuff in the research space. So yeah, hoping to work with them more this year. And of course, Chartloop is in our daily bread. So yeah, those are some of the bits that we're using.
Nice. And do you guys do anything more like around like outbound emailing orchestration, or is it a lot more quality focused?
No, 100%. So a big believer that the precision on this is key. But a ton of our clients use SalesLoft and Outreach and those sort of tools. We've also used Cognizant for a long time, which scores some of our data, and they've got an email automation tool. And then, of course, there's the old guard of ZoomInfo and all those guys who can bring more data to the party. Right,
absolutely. Cool. And so maybe a last question to wrap up. I mean, is there you mentioned Luke Rogers as an inspiring sales leader. Any other leader you look up to, or kind of a book which inspired you on growth?
Yeah, countless. Mainly my ex-bosses. I've been super lucky to work with some really awesome guys and girls. But I actually listened to a podcast the other day which had someone called Annie Duke on it. She's an ex-poker player and now does tech investment. And she talks through about how she thinks about risk and making big bets. It's super interesting. So yeah, that was quite nice to listen to and get some perspective there. And then another piece, it's not a book, but it's a good article I read recently, which I thought was pretty epic, was around painful exits. Like there's a ton of stories around there about the $1 billion result, right? But not that many on what to do when things go south. And this company raised millions, I think 10 million plus, from Borderton and even Rupert Murdoch. Like it's a slightly different tech business. But the article basically shares the lesson learned and what the founder would have done differently if he got another run at it. So obviously, while it's adjacent, it's because it's an acquisition or sale of a company, ultimately it's about a deal. And there's a ton of practical tips in there that anyone in the growth role can learn from. So yeah, that was a super interesting article. I'll send you the link for it afterwards as well.
Absolutely. And that's called Painful Exit, you said?
That should be the title of it. I think it's called What I Learned from Burning Millions of Murdoch's Money, or something funny like that.
Oh, okay. Okay, that sounds like a better selling title.
Yeah, exactly. You can tell he's got a journo background.
Yeah. Phenomenal. Well, this is really fascinating. Great to learn what life, in a day of fintech growth person is like, and exciting to follow all the trends in the space. And yeah, really appreciate you taking the time to join us here today.
Likewise, it was a pleasure. Thanks so much for asking to have me on, Sean. And yeah, really looking forward to spending more time getting to know you and Chartloop.
Fantastic. And maybe just the last thing, I mean, if anybody is looking to get into EU or Asia, how can we find you on the interwebs if anybody wants to get in touch?
So either on my LinkedIn, Will Hackett, and part of Pangea Group, or hit me up over email, will@pangeagroup.com. And it's Pangea like the supercontinent, the idea that we're bringing everyone together.
Fantastic. Awesome. Thank you, Will. Have a good one.
See ya.